it came to the point where the note wouldn't come out at all. And then it started to spread up and down. Then I couldn't hit the D or the low B flat or what have you. And before you know it, didn't really take that long. I would say probably a couple of months before it had spread all the way through all of my playing. I went to the neurologist there in Cincinnati who had a look and did a full workup and said, well, you have something called dystonia. I can laugh about this now. It wasn't funny at the time, but his comment was, well, can't you just play the saxophone? I got a lot of help from a lot of people, and in the end, I had this sort of cocktail of therapies, which sort of formed the foundation for helping me get out of trouble. There are all kinds of variations of this problem. The reason that it doesn't help to just do more fundamentals is because it's not the thing that you're doing that's causing the problem, it's how you're doing that thing. It's the thought process that you're using to accomplish that task. 2 weeks into this process of blowing no sound every single day, focusing on moving air through the instrument, I picked up my horn to do my repetitions, and I was like this, blow no sound, and sound came out. That was my aha moment, because
there you go.
I'm not here to say my lips weren't together, but in my head, I was thinking they were apart. But they must have been close enough together that sound came out, because that's what happened. And at that point, I knew I was going to be okay because I had a way out.
Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. Here we are with another interview today that was a recommendation from a previous guest of the show. If you remember back to our conversation with Dr. Lee Pearson, she recommended our guest today to me with all the praise that anyone could give as someone who has gone through injury and come back from it and been able to do so much good because of that experience. And this guest today, he is the co-owner of Mountain Peak Music, the publishing company that especially publishes resources for musician health and wellness, and also has a book that is adjacent to what we do here at the show called Notes of Hope, which is a compilation of stories of professional musicians who have experienced injury. So without further ado, Mr. David Vining, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Clark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, when I was talking to Dr. Pearson, she was like, you got to get David Vining on because he is a great trombone player and he's written books about this stuff, and I'm glad we're finally able to do this.
Oh, that's very nice. I appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. And like we were saying before we started recording, what I like to do is just have people start wherever they want to with their injury story. I know on your website, and I highly recommend anybody going through an injury, go to David's website. I believe it's just davidvining.com. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, he's got his story and a bunch of other resources there, but start wherever you would like with your injury story.
Yeah, okay. So growing up, I was always a very natural player. Things came fairly easily for me, which means that when I did run into a little bit of trouble, it really kind of threw me off my game. It does that for everybody, but in particular, if you've never had to struggle through some of these normal difficulties, which was sort of what I was up against. Anyway, so I had just gotten this new job at CCM, Cincinnati Conservatory. I was the faculty trombone professor there. And as you might imagine, that job appointment came with a good deal of stress. And going into it, I started just feeling a little funny in my embouchure. And it just sort of started with one note in particular. It was just a second space C, just a low C, and I'd try to play that note, and it just wouldn't quite center. It just felt it, it felt breathy, and so of course I did what any brass player would do. I went in the practice room and worked really hard and to try and fix this problem. Well, lo and behold, the problem got worse, and so it came to the point where the note wouldn't come out at all. And then it started to spread up and down. Then I couldn't hit the D or the low B flat or what have you. And before you know it, didn't really take that long. I would say probably a couple of months before it had spread all the way through all of my playing. And this was around 2001. Although it's pretty hard to pinpoint these things, the symptoms would have predated that by a certain amount. And in my case, it was very gradual. And like I said, as I started to zero in on it and try and fix it, it got worse more quickly. So, of course, I consulted all of my old teachers and mentors and brass pedagogues, and I got some advice that just didn't help me. Not that I'm blaming anybody, but um, it just added to the feeling of despair because nobody seemed to be able to help me. And I finally went to a doctor, a medical doctor. When you're in the middle of something like that, the main thing you want to do is just fix the problem. So you go through the things that we always do. You open your Arbenz book, right? Or you ask your teacher, or you play more long tones. And with something like what I had, all of those things really serve to make the problem worse. And I'm going to tell you why once we get a little farther along. But when I finally went to the doctor and I went to the medical side of things, the family doctor I went to really didn't know what was going on. So he actually referred me to a neurologist, thinking that it was a neurological problem, which in fact it was. So I went to the neurologist there in Cincinnati who had a look and did a full workup and said, well, you have something called dystonia. And of course, I had no idea what that was. And he wasn't a musician, this doctor, so he wasn't as sensitive to the needs of a musician. So I can laugh about this now. It wasn't funny at the time, but his comment was, well, can't you just play the saxophone? Which,
Oh man,
yeah,
I think I've gotten that comment before actually.
you look back on it, it's like, what are you even? So anyway, at least I had, an idea of what was going on. So my next step was to see a neurologist who specialized in dysfunctions among musicians, which is kind of a subset, you know. And I was living in Cincinnati, and the Cleveland Clinic has a world renowned neurology facility. So I drove up there and I saw a doctor named Dr. Letterman, who's probably retired now. This was way back in 2001. Anyway, he was an accomplished violinist and neurologist who was very well versed in this problem of dystonia. And he did the full workup. He actually took a video and watched it in slow motion, and he confirmed that yes, what you have is called focal dystonia of the embouchure. Focal meaning that it's relegated to a particular area in your body. And this type of dystonia is task specific, meaning that it mainly only affects you when you play. In my case, it was in my embouchure and it was when I played the trombone. And he said, we don't really have any reliable medical treatment options at this time. He was careful to say, I might be able to help you with some Botox injections, which Botox, right? That's what people use to get rid of, crow's feet or what have you. And he kind of walked me through this. He was careful to say it may or may not help. He had done it before, but it's very difficult to administer because it's really hard to know where to inject it with an embouchure. and it's hard to know how much to use, and the effect spikes after a month and then it goes down. So you got to maintain it and continually get the injections. And this was in the middle of the week, and he said, the way he put it to me was, well, I open the bottle every Friday and I have to use all of it. So if you want to do this, just come back on Friday and we'll set you up. I said, okay. And I drove home, and my wife, who has been the voice of reason through the entire ordeal, um, she talked me out of it. So I canceled the appointment. I never did get the Botox treatments. And the reason I'm glad that she did that was, you can imagine when you get a Botox injection, it deadens the muscle. And with an embouchure, you need some activity. But the problem is, with dystonia, you're getting too much activity. This is a basic idea, and I'll go through that in a moment. But um, and to put Botox into the equation would really prohibit you from using any other methodology to treat yourself, because it would change the entire environment of the musculature. So, anyway, I never did do that, and I'm glad I didn't. I did chat with somebody on the phone, a prominent brass player who had Botox injections, and his advice was, he said, well, if you've tried everything else and you just want to make sure you covered all the bases, go ahead. But it didn't help me. That's what he said. So,
Right.
anyway, I guess the moral of this part of this story is that the medical side, while if you see the right person, they're generous with their time and they try to be helpful, but they don't really have any reliable medicines that can help you. At least they didn't back in 2001. That may have changed in the 25 years since it happened to me. But so dystonia is a neurological movement disorder. And so the problem is actually in your brain, but it manifests itself in the muscles that you can see. And the reason that's important is that to use a therapy that only treats the muscles that you can see doesn't actually treat the problem, which occurs up here. And you
Absolutely. Yeah.
can imagine that when you do an activity, the neurons in your brain that fire in order to create the activity, they create a pathway. The neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you were to reach out and grab a cup, you have a structure up there that will deliver the instructions to your hand to pick up the cup. And there are instructions for everything, including a trombone embouchure. And when you get dystonia, those neural pathways that send the instructions to help you create your embouchure become corrupted in some way. You could imagine maybe they're fuzzy, they're unclear, maybe they cross. Um, in the case of a flute player, perhaps they have a dystonia in their finger. And so when they go to press their index finger down, the middle finger comes along for the ride, because the pathways that are associated with those two fingers have become sort of merged in a way, so that your brain actually is trying to just press down one finger, but it thinks you want to press down two fingers. Now, with an embouchure, like my problem, the effect was that I would take a big breath and I would go to blow, and the muscles that create my embouchure would just spasm. They would clamp down so that you could barely even make any air come out. The muscles were so tight. So the effect was that you could kind of make a sound, but it wasn't anything you'd want anybody to hear. And some people get dystonia, which only affects their high register or their low register. There are all kinds of um, variations of this problem. The reason that it doesn't help to just do more fundamentals is because it's not the thing that you're doing that's causing the problem, it's how you're doing that thing. It's the thought process that you're using to accomplish that task. And so when you're playing long tones like you always have, well, you're just reinforcing the old way of doing that thing. You're making the dystonia worse in a way. you can imagine there's a groove there that represents that pathway. And when you do that thing the same way you've always done it, you're just deepening that groove. And that's the last thing you want to do, right? And so what I did was I went holistic. And since I knew there were no medical treatments, I decided to retrain how I was playing, knowing that, again, it wasn't the activity itself, it was how I was thinking about the activity, right? And so I got a lot of help from a lot of people. And in the end, I had this sort of cocktail of therapies, which sort of formed the foundation for helping me get out of trouble. So the therapies included Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, body mapping, a little bit of yoga, some psychotherapy, some regular old stretching, and my own sort of procedure where I would just blow no sound. And I did a whole lot of this, and I read a whole lot of books, and I figured out a way that I could retrain how I was playing the trombone. Now, um, I don't have any scientific evidence to back up what I just said. So I don't want a whole bunch of scientists reaching out and telling me I'm crazy. What I do have is my own experience, which is where I'm speaking from here. And so when I did the retraining, I I started with the Alexander technique, which is designed, it's a movement therapy, which is designed to bring your body to a state of neutrality. We all have some tension in parts of our body that are, in particular musicians, the tension is related to how we play. We don't even know it's there. An Alexander teacher is specially trained to help you understand where it is and help you relieve the stress of billions of repetitions on your instrument and help you come to a sense of neutral. Feldenkrais is kind of the same sort of thing. Moshe Feldenkrais said, find different ways to achieve old tasks, find new ways to do old things, which appealed to me because that's kind of what I wanted to do is, I was thinking I have this aberrant pathway in my brain. It can't be used anymore, so I need to form a conduit around it. I need to find a new way to play trombone that's different enough from the old way so that it doesn't suck me back into the old spasmodic movement pattern. That was my thinking. So, anyway, based on all of these movement therapies, it helped me come to more of a sense of neutral when I picked up my trombone. And then, as I mentioned before, now that I had this sense of neutrality, I would pick up my trombone and just blow a phrase without bringing my lips close enough together to make a sound. I call it blow no sound. And the reason I did that was every time I would actually touch my lips together, the spasm would occur. It would be involuntary. So the habitual movement pattern was a breath, touch my lips together, and then a spasm. So what I did was the breath and then just this. Without actually touching them together, I would just blow no sound. Now, admittedly, there was no trombone sound. It was just air coming through my trombone, but there was also no spasm. And that's the first time I had experienced that in years. And so I satisfied myself with doing thousands of repetitions, blow no sound, but don't touch my lips together. In the moment, I was thinking, well, eventually I'm going to have to learn how to do this to make a sound, eventually, because you have to have something going on there. So, about 2 weeks into this process of blowing no sound every single day, focusing on moving air through the instrument, singing in my head of what I wanted to sound like, I picked up my horn to do my repetitions, and I was like this, blow no sound, and sound came out. That was my aha moment because
There
I'm
you
not,
go.
yeah, I'm not here to say my lips weren't together, but in my head, I was thinking they were apart. But they must have been close enough together that sound came out because that's what happened. And at that point, I knew I was going to be okay because I had a way out. Up until that point, I had no idea what would work or what wouldn't work. And so from that point forward, it was thousands of more repetitions just to reinforce this idea. And to this day, that's how I play. And I'm happy to say that I've been able to recover and resume my playing activities and my teaching and everything. And and that's where the publishing company came from. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that's the basic idea behind my story. There are a few details I'm sure we could get into, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of your website, one of the things that I wanted to point out that's on there is something that you said, and this is part of kind of your recovery journey. Um, while you say, and I'm paraphrasing, while you seeking advice from others is good, you are in charge of taking control of your own recovery. And one thing that I mean, I'm 2 years into my recovery, and everybody's story is different, and their journey is different. But that can be a really hard lesson to learn, especially with the teaching model that we've just grown up with as musicians. It's like we have a question, we go to our teacher, right, or a professor, or whoever, or director. And I kind of am starting to see a shift in that now, just in general. Like higher education pedagogy is the student is the teacher, and then the teachers are the facilitators. But anyway, getting back to the other thing is like, in your journey, like what helped you to be able to take control of your recovery,
Hmm.
while still like considering other people's opinions and taking other people's advice, that you know, trusted people's advice, experts advice, and stuff like that. Where did you find that balance?
Yeah, such a great question, Clark, and such a very, very good point. Um, Before I figured out a path, to recovery, one of the bits of advice that I got was to look at old videos of me playing because I played really well. So just do that. Sort of,
And most do.
yeah,
You know, they play
refine.
well before their injury.
Exactly. Yeah. Just go back and do what you used to do. And so I did that. I was pretty religious about doing that. I looked at the videos, I had my horn there, and I would just kind of mimic all of the little movements and what have you. And that made the problem worse. um, that's motivation. When you're in this situation, you try this and it doesn't work. You back out and you try that. And that doesn't work. You back out. And so you're trying different things from different angles, um, until you find one that has, I don't want to say a weakness, but it has a little sliver of hope, which you can use. Now, I don't know if there's some sort of special attribute that allowed me to do that, but for me, it felt pragmatic to do it that way. It felt like I had to do something, or I had to find a new career. It was literally a Y in the road. So I wanted to prod enough so that I was satisfied that, okay, it's not possible. Let's move on with our life, right? Um, and so for me, when I did ask all of the experts, and even the doctors had no answer, not really. I thought, okay, well, I'm pretty close to the end, but let me just try all these other things before I give up. So that's how I would put it, is that I was kind of backed into a corner, and this was my Hail Mary, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to give this one more try. I love playing music, and I'd like to be able to resurrect my career, and so that's how it happened. I will say a couple of things related to that. In 2001, there was little to no help. I mean, I don't remember finding much online about dystonia in musicians. Of course, there's plenty of research about dystonia, but there was very little help in terms of musical or trombone or anything specific to my situation. And that's pretty devastating when you can't find anything. And so that's part of where Mountain Peak Music came from, and particularly the book you mentioned, Notes of Hope. Well, the title says it all. It's stories of musicians
Absolutely.
and people who have been through trouble. I just wanted to provide a resource. That's part of the mission of my publishing company. And the second thing I'll say about that is now, of course, I'm all over the internet. That's all fine. I don't mind talking about my story, and people do tend to find me. They they fill out my contact page, and we chat a little bit about their situation. And the people that I think have a better chance of recovery are the ones who don't insist on a linear flow chart. And
Oh
as you
man,
pointed out, um,
so true.
our pedagogy is kind of set up like that. You know, you're having trouble tonguing, open your Arbenz book. Do this exercise this many times over this amount of time, and your tonguing will improve. And that's been a tried and true method. However, with something like this, it is a circuitous route. Sometimes it works, and you got to try this, and you tack back, and then this way, and then maybe you add this part of the cocktail, and then that part. And so that part of the process is extremely confusing to most musicians. So when I chat with someone who's having trouble, the people who are open to experimenting, who are willing to take what I did and change it or modify it so that it works for them in a particular way, those people have a better chance of succeeding. The people who just take the exercise that I share with them and just do it like that, you know, they may have some success and they may not, who knows? But I'm always careful to advise folks that it's up to you. I'm going to share what I did with you, and you're going to take what I did and try it out. And maybe this little exercise works. You'll continue to do that one, but you'll reject this one. I won't be offended in the least. And so it really is a cocktail. And I think that's probably true of most musicians' injuries, not just dystonia.
Probably almost all of them, if not all of them, you know, because and I love there's so many things that you just said that I want to point out and acknowledge because there are these like you said you were backed into a wall and you had that why in the road and so many people when they go through an injury they become I don't know if you can hear there's a thunderstorm happening behind me. Hopefully we can edit that out. But the the why in the road that we come to,
Yeah,
right? With so many of our injuries, some people experience injury and it's not that bad; they're over it in 2 weeks. But even then, it's that we have to be able to use the fuel as fuel. The reason why we're a musician and why what we have to define what our recovery is going to mean to us, basically, if we do come back.
yeah,
In order for us to be able to be willing to do what is necessary to come back and realize that it's not a linear process and realize that it is circuitous and it's exponential and then one step forward, two steps back sometimes. You have to be willing to delineate what this recovery is going to mean to you and how you're going to be able to use it for your own benefit and for the benefit of others in order for you to be able to do what is necessary to come back. In my opinion, that's what my experience has meant to me and been for me.
yeah,
It or else it'll just be something that just a bump in the road and we move on and you know we don't learn from it or we just completely move on from it.
right.
And
Yeah,
that's just a personal decision everyone's got to make.
for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. There's also an emotional component because when we make music, emotions are involved, and it makes it
Absolutely.
complicated. Yeah, because prior to my recovery, I identified almost exclusively as a trombone player. And I don't think that's unique for most musicians, but it's also not very healthy. Right. And when you have everything in that, all your eggs in that one basket, you become myopic and it makes it hard to see a vision of a global lifestyle that's more healthy. And I think that contributes to musicians' problems.
It totally does. One of the biggest turning points for my injury actually just happened a few months ago from a emotional, cognitive, whatever you want to call it standpoint. This, like on this show, I really like to focus on the mindset type of things because that is, I mean, it's connected to the body, as you said, as you mentioned, and it got to the point, and for me as someone who is a person of faith, it got to the point where I had to come to the terms of like, if it really if I really am not able to come back, will I be okay with that and be able to make something of my life and serve and do all these wonderful things with my life if trumpet is not a part of it? And I don't know if that's something that everybody needs to be able to get to that point with their injury, but I definitely think that like when I do come back, my perspective will have totally changed about my career as a musician
Yeah.
and what I'm able to do and who I'm able to serve. And I think everybody has that capacity when they're going through an injury to be able to reframe it as something that's serving them and
Yeah.
has given them that perspective shift. Because that, I
Right.
mean, I've heard with athletes, there's something in sports psychology called the athletic identity. And
Mm.
that's something that sports psychologists help athletes who have gone through injury to get past because their recovery is equally not as linear as
Right.
ours is.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's
I
a
mean,
good
musicians
point.
are athletes,
In a way, yes, yes, that's true. You know, one of the things that I came up with that helped me a lot was I I feel like being obsessive is kind of part of being a musician. You know, we're
yeah.
all, we all want to succeed and we know how competitive it is.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the show. I just wanted to jump in here real quick and tell you about something that I'm really, really excited about. For a while now, I have wanted to create an even more effective resource than just the podcast that injured musicians can go to receive the support that they need. And recently I did just that. So write this down. Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. I know it's a long title. We're still working on that part. But this is a place where people can go now, injured musicians and even musicians who have gone through injury in the past, and people that help musicians go through injury, where they can go to receive the support that they need, whether that be ask questions, share their victories, share their frustrations, and overall just receive the community and the support that they need in a very proactive, intentional way. And so I just ask that you guys support these injured musicians by sharing this group with them, that they can receive the support that they need. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show.
So you take that obsession and you apply it in a different way, you modify it in some way, but it's a trait that is not going to go away, right? Um, so you might as well use it to your advantage. And the other thing that, as you were talking, I was thinking, I don't mind saying I'm not particularly a spiritual person. Um, so for me, one of the byproducts, one of the things that happened was to create the publishing company was my way of sharing ideas that felt like had a healthy connection that would help people not only recover from injury, but maybe avoid injury, if they were to learn in these ways. And so I poured a lot of my effort into creating this publishing company. And as it turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but as it turns out, I had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak within me that I didn't even know. I discovered it. And so the publishing company now has kind of become my alter ego in a way. And this is my way of getting ideas out and in front of people, and things that are unique or um, that fill pedagogical holes that are out there, or that replace things that I don't think are particularly effective or healthy. So it started out, like I said, as just my stuff, but it's become bigger than that. And I'm really pleased about that because now we have authors from all different instruments. And, we only publish method books. We don't do compositions and arrangements. We've branded ourselves as a company that shares teaching and learning ideas. And so, yeah, that's been a really beneficial and satisfying result of my troubles with my playing. So,
Well, I'm so glad you went there because that's where I wanted to go next. The thing that another big turning point for me in my recovery was finding something, realizing that you know getting out of the musician identity in and of itself, and seeing what other things I could make of my life. This podcast is probably the best example of it, and for you, this publishing company. And I think it's so important for musicians going through injury that they find something that they can pour that obsessive nature into,
yes.
as well as their recovery, right? And I like to think of it as like within the musical sphere, keeping yourself musically healthy. So keeping yourself in the game musically while you can't play your primary instrument. For me, that looked like learning how to play the piano,
Mhm.
and writing a little bit more, composing, and then doing other things like I totally agree with you with this entrepreneurial streak. That's something I've also
Right.
discovered within myself. What was
Right.
the process like when you and you've already kind of alluded to this, but what types of things did you do include like and go deeper into the story of how Mountain Peak got started, but what
Sure.
types of things did you do to stay musically healthy, and then also what spurred and continues to spur the
Yeah.
drive for Mountain Peak music?
Yeah. So one of the primary tenets of the Alexander technique is something called global awareness. And an Alexander teacher will encourage you to include not just the treble area, but also your neck and your musculature in your arms and how you're sitting or standing, the environment, the temperature, the ambient noise. This global awareness provides a foundation for your brain to operate in a more efficient way. It seems counterintuitive, but it really is true, having been through it. And when you're faced with a trouble of your embouchure, of course, your attention goes right there. And the more you focus on that problem, the deeper the old aberrant groove becomes. It's a real paradox. And so you have to expand your awareness, not make it more focused. You have to expand it. And that's a metaphor for my career because when I was your age, a long, long time ago, I was just, I had those blinders on and ready to win that orchestra job. And now I can see that that mindset contributed to the problem. It didn't cause it, but it certainly contributed to it. And I know that now because I have a much broader world view. And coming out of the issues that I had, I discovered a talent for writing etudes of all things. Now, I don't consider myself a composer, but I know how to put together and create an etude that addresses a particular thing. And I think that is one of the keys to a really good etude book. One example is a book called Range Songs that I wrote shortly after I was able to recover and start Mountain Peak Music. Range Songs uses one page etudes that I wrote with what I call a target note. The target note is the highest note on the page. On trombone, let's call it just F above the staff. So I wrote 5 etudes with F as the target note, and then I went up a half step. 5 etudes with G flat, 5 etudes with G, and we went all the way up to high F. And then the second half of the book, the target notes are low. There's the healthy part because what you can do is play a high one, play a low one, play a high one, play a low one. And so you can see there's a thread that goes through all of this. The missing link, the thing that I didn't know was my ability to come up with these etudes. Now, I don't think they're particularly profound, but they're effective because they're predictable, They're one page. They go up to a target note, and they allow you to measure your success. You can stay at this particular level, or you can go up or down, or what have you. But the most important attribute is that there's always a crescendo or a phrasing to get you to hit the high note, meaning that you have a musical intention instead of a technical one. And that's the secret sauce. So it's a really good
There you go.
example of what I'm talking about is that, well, that's a book that I don't really know if there's anything else like that out there. I know people talk about such a thing, but to write it down, even though it might be obvious and not very profound, has been very effective. So that is in our catalog, and it's been franchised through the various instruments. I've hired authors to do a trumpet version and a horn version and tuba, what have you. Um, but the very first book that we published is the breathing book. And this is a body mapping book. So it's an anatomical accounting of how breathing works. And the reason that's there is while I'm not an Alexander teacher, I am a certified body mapper. And so, as a result of doing the Alexander lessons, the body mapping is kind of an offshoot of Alexander technique. And the difference is in the Alexander technique, you have to hire a teacher who lays their hands on you and they guide your head or what have you in order to help you come to neutral, like I mentioned before. Body mapping you can do by yourself. It's self exploration. It's helpful to have someone to guide you, but you can do it by yourself. And that's why it's effective to write a book that talks about, the anatomy of breathing so that we can weed out all of the breathing baloney that's out there and help people understand how breathing works anatomically from a factual standpoint instead of through vague metaphor, which is very prominent in my world. And so I wanted to do my part to set the record straight about breathing because I think part of what happened to me, um, I was under some misunderstandings about breathing, and I think my breathing was compromised. Once again, I don't think that caused the problem, but I think it contributed to it. And so I think breathing based on anatomical reality is more effective than vague metaphor, which may or may not be anatomically accurate. And so the breathing book, much like range songs, the breathing book presents a fact and some images, and then you play. And then the next chapter, fact, some images, and then you play. If you don't play, you've just learned some anatomy.
Right. You got to
And
apply it.
so,
You got to apply it.
the idea is to improve your playing and to apply the breathing information in a musically meaningful way. And that's a good summary of Mountain Peak music. Those are the things that I want to do to help people in, future generations.
Totally. I'm really glad you brought up the vague metaphors because that's so pervasive in brass pedagogy and all well intentioned, of course, but it's just all different ways of learning. But definitely there were some things where there was some language that I had grown up with as a trumpet player that was not as helpful for me as a burgeoning musician in playing healthfully, and it was just eye-opening and actually very cathartic at the beginning of my injury to realize, okay, this is where I went wrong physically or pedagogically, if you will, and this is how to fix it, and this is the benefit of you fixing it. It actually becomes easier to play, and I think some people in your book, Notes of Hope, actually talk about that being a very helpful realization to come to, is realizing that, okay, this is what caused or contributed to the injury. I really like using that word, contributing. This is what contributed to it, and this is how to fix it, and this is the benefit of fixing it.
Right.
And that application is so helpful when
Yeah, it is.
dealing with the recovery process, right?
Yeah. When I was working through my recovery and I was learning about body mapping, when I got to the breathing stuff, it was a revelation to me because I'd never learned it and I never thought about it. And so when I was a youngster, I was told to breathe low. Low brass players hear this a lot. You're supposed to put the ear down where your tummy is, all the way down to where your belly button is. And it's not accurate. And it's backwards. It's what I call belly dancing breathing.
Oh, nice.
um, right. And so, if you're focused on pooching your belly button out, you're actually all you're doing is you're flexing your abdominal muscles. You're not bringing air into your body. Um, so anyway, in the breathing book, we go through all of the different components of breathing, and I like to say, well, your lungs actually are up here. They're behind your ribs. They're not down where your belly button is. So if you're literally sending air down there, we better get you to the hospital, right?
Yeah. There you
Right.
go.
Now, this does point out the fact that people who say this, breathe low, they probably don't mean it literally, or hopefully they don't. Surely they know that your lungs aren't down there. But if you're a little kid, you don't know that they don't mean it literally, right? And so when I was told this as a youngster, I took it literally. I'm pooching my belly button out. I was a belly dancing breather through and through. And I thought, well, if I pooch it out a little, I'd be a good player. But what if I pooch it out a lot? Then I'll be a really good player. And that's how
Right. Yeah.
youngsters think, right? So I
Yep.
even had a teacher, I don't know if you've heard of this, but she laid me on the floor and put a book on my belly button. And she said, I want you to imagine that's going to touch the ceiling. And I thought, okay, so I'm pushing, pushing, pushing. That is a misguided strategy. It emphasizes absolutely the wrong thing. And having had time to think about this, I think what happens is with a youngster, and I mean a beginner player, typically if you say to little Johnny, take a big breath, they might do this, right? They'll raise their shoulders in
Right.
a really artificial fashion, which of course we all know that's ridiculous. And they're just kids, they don't know any better. But if the response of the teacher is number one, don't move your shoulders, and number two, breathe low, well, now they're doing exactly the opposite thing in exactly the exaggerated fashion they did the first thing. And so neither strategy is correct. To be a good breather, you have to move your ribs. You just have to because your lungs are behind your ribs. And when the ribs move, the lungs are able to accept the air that's coming in the body. And it's really a physics equation because when your ribs move, your thoracic cavity gets bigger and the air pressure inside is less than the air pressure outside. And the air pressure equalizes by air rushing into your body.
Equalizes.
Yeah, so the more you move your ribs and increase the diameter of your thoracic cavity, the more air you can take in. It's pretty simple. And so if you're not really moving your ribs, you're not breathing very, very vigorously. So I don't
No, that's a
I
great
don't want to
point.
get I don't want to get too far down into the weeds, but I do want to mention one other thing, which is of course the truth about the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is the primary muscle of inspiration. Muscles can only contract in one direction, and for that reason, they tend to come in pairs, bicep, tricep. And so the diaphragm does its work when you inhale, which means when you exhale, it's relaxing. And when they're called antagonists to the diaphragm take over. There is a fluid equilibrium between the diaphragm and then the external or internal intercostals, which bring the ribs back down, and the abdominal muscles. These work in tandem and they're a fluid equilibrium back and forth, inhale, exhale. So people who say keep your tummy firm at all times are disrupting the process. It should be flabby when you inhale, if you want to think of it like that. And then those abs engage when you exhale. Now, fortunately, you don't have to really think about it. Your body knows what to do. And so just like
Yeah.
in range songs, when I'm suggesting you think musically and hit the high note and let your air serve the music, I'm proposing the same thing here. When you think about breathing, take in the air you need to provide the energy behind the music that's necessary. Don't think so much about how to get there, so long as you're not inserting some sort of artificial movement in the process, then your body knows what to do already. A lot of the breathing book has to do with unlearning what some teachers may have taught you.
Well, yeah, and for me, actually, that principle of exhalation is relaxation was one of my aha moments. It was like, wait,
Nice.
you mean the most natural process ever is how you play the trumpet, how you play the trumpet, how you play a wind instrument? And because for me, I had always thought like there's like normal breathing and normal like living, I guess, existing, and then there's
Yeah,
trumpet playing. Or I should
right.
go this way. And then there's trumpet playing. And
Right.
as if it's some external like physiology you have
Yeah,
to apply, but it's
yeah,
really just
some
applying the normal
mystery. Yeah,
physiology. Yeah, exactly. It's just applying normal physiology to an inanimate object.
right,
A piece
right.
of plumbing, as I like to affectionately call it.
Yeah, that's right.
uh,
Well, what's very
s-
interesting about that is, as I mentioned, now we have an entire series of breathing books. We even have breathing
right,
book for bassoon. There's one for flute. All of the anatomy is the same. Duh, we're all built the same, right? But
right,
every instrument has their own way of thinking and communicating with their tribe. And so while my verbiage works for the trombone and euphonium and tuba players for the most part, the flute players, while they use the same anatomy, their playing exercises are different and how they apply it is a little different. But the common
absolutely.
denominator is the anatomy. So that's been very interesting for me to learn. I've learned more about the oboe than I ever cared to, for example.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, but we could talk. That could be a whole nother podcast episode, and I've learned so
Right,
much just from
right.
that. There's a couple of final questions I want to ask. Going back to the actual injury aspect of it. The I feel like we get asked a lot of interesting questions as musicians who have gone through injury or experiencing injury, like why don't you just switch to play the saxophone or something like that. And so, what is one question people ask about your injury or about injury in general that you wish was asked less or is just not helpful? And then also, what question do you wish is asked more regarding
Oh,
injury?
okay. Well, I will say those of us who have been through injury or are currently suffering from injury, we, I think, have a heightened sense of empathy, which is a good thing. So, in a way, this sounds contrite, but there really aren't any terrible questions. There aren't any questions that are off limits because, I mean, I remember being lost and needing a lifeline, and so I don't want to discourage any questions in particular because you just never know the thing that somebody is going through. Um, I if I had to kind of zero in on something, it would be how do I get better? Um, Now that's a perfectly logical question, but like I said before, it's really not a flow chart. It's not linear. It's all over the place, and so the answer to that question is far more convoluted than the questioner will expect. And it's going to sound like I'm not really answering their question, but that's because it's really pretty complicated. So, for example, we'll go into a little bit of a history of their pedagogy. How were they taught? What were some of the things that perhaps created misinformation or misunderstandings that we can help with? So, that's the first thing. And maybe the second thing, what do I wish was asked more? Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that either. Um, yeah, I think maybe we talked a little bit about broadening our our awareness and maybe something related to that. Like, what are some things that aren't directly related to the injury but did help you in the end? And my answer to that question would be things like the movement therapies, Alexander technique. I don't feel like the Alexander technique directly um, helped with the problem, but it did set the stage for me to find my way through. There's a subtle but important difference there because most people who engage in a therapy like this, they're expecting results immediately and directly, and sometimes the result is not direct, but it is sort of tangential in a way. And so I think there's kind of a lot of that. And I think you have to be curious and be willing to experiment and explore. That was the majority of my journey was exploring, trying things out, rejecting things that didn't work, focusing on things that did, pairing them with other things that did. And then in the end, creating my own cocktail.
Yeah, I love how you keep using that word. I haven't heard that used before. Cocktail of therapies and different things. I mean, it's so true. I mean, I don't think who was it that I was talking to. Somebody was saying that. It was a different show that I was helping with. There's a horn player who said that one of his colleagues said, "Yeah, you're never really going to be able to say, like, this is what made me get better, or this is what, like, pinpoint one singular thing. It's just a myriad of things. It's a cocktail of things,
Yeah.
and little aha moments. And I like to ask, well, first of all, David, just thank you so much for your time today. This has been on my list. This particular conversation has been on my list for several months, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to share your time with us today. The last two questions I'd love to ask, you've already really answered one of them. Is the reason why I started this podcast was because of another podcast where somebody shared their experience with injury, and I was able to go and reach out to them. And so if somebody were to say, "Hey, I'm going through my own injury. I listened to you on Trust the Process with Clark, and I'm going through my own injury. What advice do you have for me? What's one thing that you would tell them?"
I would say be curious and learn about what you're going through and cast a wide net. That's what I did. Um, there are a whole set of brain books that I read, which helped me understand what was going on because it's pretty mysterious. And it doesn't have to be, while the doctors don't have, a medical treatment, there are resources out there which can kind of walk you through the theories about why these things happen. And so on my website, there's a whole list of those books. It's davidvining.com, and there's a resources button. If you go in there, you'll see a whole list of books. And I would read all of them and find more because there have been more written since I since I comprised that list. But a really good one to start with. It's a very easy read. It's called The Mind and the Brain, and it's particularly appropriate for a neurological problem like dystonia, but it might be helpful even if you don't have a neurological problem, you have some different problem. And that's a good example of what I'm talking about. Even if you feel like it's not directly related, go ahead and learn about it because you just never know what tiny bit of information might seep in there and trigger the right thing for you. And so be curious and learn as much as you can about your situation and cast a wide net and be globally aware of your situation. Don't be myopic and don't have blinders on.
So good. Yeah. I was looking through that resource list, and I now have a very long book list to get through.
Right.
It's so. The last question I like to ask is, in addition to like what takeaways you've been able to gain from your injury experience, if you had the opportunity to go back to you at the time of your injury and either take away that experience and you just move on with your life, or to leave that experience there, kind of my time travel question, what would you
Oh,
choose to do?
I wouldn't change it. Yeah, I wouldn't change it. Um, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But, you know, even at the time, I knew it wasn't life and death, right? So it wasn't critical in terms of me, living. It was critical in terms of my career. But the thing that I don't think I've explicitly said is once I was finally recovered and I'd been through all of this stuff that we've been talking about, it turns out that I was a better teacher, I was a better father, I was a better husband, I was a better person just as a result of having been through all of this. And that's why I wouldn't change it.
Awesome. And to everybody out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us today. Just take whatever you can from this and share it with others who are going through injury, and send me a message on the audio versions of these episodes. You can find a little send me a text link that I'd love to hear where you're listening from, what your experience has been, all sorts of good stuff. And until next time, everybody, keep on keeping on and keep trusting the process. Hey, before you go, we need your help with something real quick. Somewhere out there's a musician who is going through an injury or just a tough time. There may even be an educator with a student in that situation that they don't know how to help. We need your help in getting this message to them. Would you do them the favor of sharing this episode on your socials and with your friends? Also, cliche that it may have become, leaving a rating and a review actually does help people find us, not just boost our ego. So would you take a quick second and leave us a review so that musician can find us more easily? If you want to reach out to me personally, I would love to hear from you. Just look for the send us a text message button in the show notes of the episode. You can do that on any episode on your chosen podcast platform except YouTube. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. I want to extend another heartfelt thanks to my team, without which this podcast would not be able to happen. Thanks to Daniel Baldwin, our audio engineer, Kevin West, our music and sound effects coordinator, and Dana Lovell, our promotional materials coordinator. So to all of you out there in podcast land, keep on keeping on and trust the process.